I want to say one thing to the American people. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false, and I need to go back to work for the American people.
From this chair, I testified before the Office of Independent Counsel and the grand jury. I answered their questions truthfully, including questions about my private life, questions no American citizen would ever want to answer. As you know, in a deposition in January, I was asked questions about my relationship with Monica Lewinsky. While my answers were legally accurate, I did not volunteer information. Indeed, I did have a relationship with Miss Lewinsky that was not appropriate. In fact, it was wrong. It constituted a critical lapse in judgment and a personal failure on my part for which I am solely and completely responsible.
Bill Clinton stands accused of perjury and obstruction of justice and was forced to give evidence on video camera in his own defense to a criminal grand jury. The president stands or falls by his own words. Kenneth Starr is leading an independent counsel investigation that began with Bill Clinton's business dealings some 20 years ago. Nothing substantive has as yet appeared out of those early investigations into the president's and the First Lady's dealing in the Whitewater affair, and the investigation has moved into his private life.
We solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Good afternoon, Mr. President.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your full name for the record, sir?
William Jefferson Clinton.
My name is Saul Weisenberg. I'm a Deputy Independent Counsel with the Office of Independent Counsel. And with me today are some other attorneys from the Office of Independent Counsel.
Public opinion will help decide if he is to be impeached. If that impeachment were successful, he would be removed from office.
Mr. President, you understand that your testimony here today is under oath.
I do.
And you understand that because you have sworn to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, that if you were to lie or intentionally mislead the grand jury, you could be prosecuted for perjury and or obstruction of justice.
I believe that's correct.
That the president lied is no longer in question. What is yet to be determined is how his fellow countrymen and women will view this testimony against strong and intrusive questioning, which few would have stood up to as the president did.
I have sworn an oath to tell the grand jury the truth, and that's what I intend to do.
Bill Clinton's high office has not protected him from the Starr inquiry, which has relentlessly pursued him at huge expense to the taxpayer for the past 4 years. Now, Kenneth Starr and his team of prosecutors have succeeded in cornering the president by entrapping him in his own wrongdoings. The question remains, however, does his conduct mean that he should be impeached?
Mr. Bittman, I think maybe I can save you and the grand jury a lot of time if I read a statement which I think will make it clear what the nature of my relationship with Ms. Lewinsky was, how it related to the testimony I gave, what I was trying to do in that testimony. And I think it will perhaps make it possible for you to ask even more relevant questions from your point of view. And with your permission, I'd like to read that statement.
Absolutely. Please, Mr. President.
When I was alone with Miss Lewinsky on certain occasions in early 1996 and once in early 1997, I engaged in conduct that was wrong. These encounters did not consist of sexual intercourse. They did not constitute sexual relations as I understood that term to be defined at my January 17, 1998 deposition. But they did involve inappropriate, intimate contact. These inappropriate encounters ended at my insistence in early 1997. I also had occasional telephone conversations with Ms. Lewinsky that included inappropriate sexual banter. I regret that what began as a friendship came to include this conduct, and I take full responsibility for my actions. While I will provide the grand jury whatever other information I can, because of privacy considerations affecting my family, myself, and others, and in an effort to preserve the dignity of the office I hold, this is all I will say about the specifics of these particular matters. I will try to answer to the best of my ability other questions, including questions about my relationship with Ms. Lewinsky, questions about my understanding of the term sexual relationship as I understood it to be defined at my January 17, 1998 deposition, and questions concerning alleged subordination of perjury, obstruction of justice, and intimidation of witnesses. That, Mr. Bittman, is my statement.
In our American system, there is a presumption of innocence until guilt is proven, and the allegations against the president have not been tested in Bill Clinton's defense. But the president is likely to be found guilty or not first in the court of public opinion. It is the American public who must first decide. The coming midterm elections will prove critical to the fortunes of the so far merely wounded White House incumbent.
During this time, Mr. President, you're being sued for sexual harassment by a woman who claims, among other things, that others got benefits that she didn't because she didn't have oral sex with you. While this is happening, your powerful friend, Vernon Jordan, is helping to get Monica Lewinsky a job and a lawyer. He's helping to get a job and a lawyer for someone who had some kind of sex with you and who has been subpoenaed in the very case, the Jones case. Don't you see a problem with this? Didn't you see a problem with this?
No. Would you like to know why?
Isn't that why Vernon, I would, but isn't that why Vernon Jordan asked you on December 19th whether or not you had sexual relationships with Monica Lewinsky, and why he asked her? Because he knew it would be so highly improper to be helping her with a lawyer and a job if in fact she had had a relationship with you?
I don't believe that at all. I don't believe that at all, particularly since even if you look at the facts here in their light most unfavorable to me, no one has suggested that there was any sexual harassment on my part. I formed an opinion really early in 1996. And again, well, let me finish the sentence. I formed an opinion early in 1996. Once I got into this unfortunate and wrong conduct, that when I stopped it, which I knew I'd have to do, and which I should have done a long time before I did, that she would talk about it. Not because Monica Lewinsky's a bad person. She's basically a good girl. She's a good young woman with a good heart and a good mind. I think she is burdened by some unfortunate conditions of her upbringing. But she's basically a good person. But I knew that the minute there was no longer any contact, she would talk about this. She would have to. She couldn't help it. It was a part of her psyche. So I had put myself at risk, sir. I was not trying to buy her silence or get Vernon Jordan to buy her silence.
The Paula Jones case alleged sexual harassment, but this has never been an issue in the Clinton-Lewinsky controversy. The relationship was obviously a consensual one.
In 1996, I think most of the times that Ms. Lewinsky was there may not have been anybody around except maybe coming in and out, but not permanently. So that's correct. I didn't try to involve Betty in that in any way.
Well, not only did you not try to involve her, you specifically tried to exclude her and everyone else. Isn't that right?
Well, yes, I've never, I mean, it's almost humorous, sir. I'd have to be an exhibitionist not to have tried to exclude everyone else.
Starr charges that the president lied under oath and engaged in a pattern of activity to conceal evidence of his relationship with Monica Lewinsky.
I don't remember exactly what I did say with her. That's what you say I said.
If Miss Curry testified to that she says you told her, I was never alone with her, right?
Well, I was never alone with her.
Say that, Mr. President?
Mr. Pittman, just a minute. I was never alone with her. Right might be a question. And what I might have meant by that is in the Oval Office complex. She filled out this affidavit. If she believed that the definition of sexual relationship was two people having intercourse, then this is accurate. And I believe that is the definition that most ordinary Americans would give it. If you said Jane and Harry have a sexual relationship, and you're not talking about people being drawn into a lawsuit and being given definitions and then a great effort to trick them in some way, but you're just talking about people in ordinary conversation. I'll bet the grand jurors, if they were talking about two people they know and said they have a sexual relationship, they meant they were sleeping together. They meant they were having intercourse together. So I'm not at all sure that this affidavit is not true and was not true in Ms. Lewinsky's mind at the time she swore it out.
Did you talk with Ms. Lewinsky about what she meant to write in her affidavit?
I didn't talk to her about her definition. I did not know what was in this affidavit before it was filled out specifically. I did not know what words were used specifically before it was filled out or what meaning she gave to them. But I'm just telling you that it's certainly true what she says here, that we didn't have, there was no employment, no benefit in exchange. There was nothing having anything to do with sexual harassment. And if she defined sexual relationship in the way I think most Americans do, meaning intercourse, then she told the truth.
What else would sexual relationship include besides intercourse?
Well, I think, let me answer what I said before. I think most people, when they use that term, include sexual relationships and whatever other sexual contact is involved in a particular relationship, but they think it includes intercourse as well. And I would have thought so before I got into this case and heard all I've heard and seen all I've seen. I would have thought that that's what nearly everybody thought it meant.
President Clinton's definition of sexual relations may strain the bounds of credibility, but full sexual intercourse has never been alleged.
Is that why Vernon Jordan asked you on December 19th whether or not you had sexual relationships with Monica Lewinsky, and why he asked her? Because he knew it would be so highly improper to be helping her with a lawyer and a job if in fact she had had a relationship with you?
I don't know. I don't believe that at all. I don't believe that at all, particularly since even if you look at the facts here in their light most unfavorable to me, no one has suggested that there was any sexual harassment on my part. And I don't think it was wrong to be helping her. Look.
A subpoenaed witness in a case against you?
Absolutely.
As a key part of the case against the president, the prosecution team is seeking to expose an attempted cover-up on the business of gifts given to Monica Lewinsky.
My memory is that on some date in December, and I'm sorry I don't remember when it was, she said, well, what if they ask me about the gifts you have given me? And I said, well, if you get a request to produce those, you have to give them whatever you have. And it just, to me, I don't now see this as a problem. And if she thought it was a problem, I think it must have been from really a misapprehension of the circumstances. I certainly never encouraged her not to comply lawfully with the subpoena.
On the subject of gift giving, the president maintains that the gifts were not a problem and felt that there was no reason why they should not have known about the gifts.
This gift issue, maybe it's because I have a different experience, but you know, the president gets hundreds of gifts a year, maybe more. I have always given a lot of gifts to people, especially if they give me gifts. And this was no big deal to me. I mean, it's nice. I enjoy it. I gave dozens of personal gifts to people last Christmas. I give gifts to people all the time. Friends of mine gives me gifts all the time. Give me ties, give me books, give me other things. So it was just not a big deal. And I told Ms. Lewinsky that just passing. I said, you know,
if they ask you for this, you'll have to give them whatever you have. And I think, Mr. Bittman, it must have happened before then, because either that or Ms. Lewinsky didn't want to tell me that she had to subpoena it, because that was the language I remember her using.
He did, however, quibble about what he meant by his own words on the subject.
She sent cards sometimes that were just funny, even a little bit off color, but they were funny. She liked to send me cards, and I got a lot of those cards. Several anyway, I don't know a lot. I got a few.
She professed her love to you in these cards after the end of the relationship, didn't she? She
Well,
said she loved you.
Sir, the truth is that most of the time, even when she was expressing her feelings for me in affectionate terms, I believe that she had accepted, understood my decision to stop this inappropriate contact. She knew from the very beginning of our relationship that I was apprehensive about it. And I think that, in a way, she felt a little freer to be affectionate because she knew that nothing else was going to happen. I can't explain entirely what was in her mind. But most of these messages were not what you would call over the top. They weren't things that, if you read them, you would say, oh my goodness, these people are having some sort of sexual affair.
Mr. President,
But some of them were quite affectionate.
my question was, did she not profess her love to you in these cards and letters that she sent to you after the relationship ended?
Most of them were signed love, love, Monica. I don't know that I would consider, I don't believe that in most of these cards and letters she professed her love, but she might well have. But love can mean different things too, Mr. Bittman. There are a lot of women with whom I have never had any inappropriate conduct, who are friends of mine, who will say from time to time, I love you.
The gifts given by Bill Clinton were mostly trivial, even mildly bizarre.
Did you also give her a marble bear's head carving from Vancouver, Canada?
I did do that. I remember that.
You also gave her a Rockettes blanket that has the famous Rockettes from New York?
I did do that. I had that in my possession for a couple of years, but had never used it, and she was going to New York, so I thought it would be a nice thing to give her.
You gave her a box of cherry chocolates, is that right?
I don't remember that, sir. I mean, there could have been. I just don't remember.
Bill Clinton admits to suffering from a partially defective memory.
After you gave her the gifts on December 28th, did you speak with your secretary, Ms. Curry, and ask her to pick up a box of gifts that, or some compilation of gifts that Ms. Lewinsky would have?
No, sir, I didn't do that.
When you testified in the Paula Jones case, this was only 2.5 weeks after you had given her these 6 gifts. You were asked at page 75 of the deposition, lines 2 through 5, well, have you ever given any gifts to Monica Lewinsky? And you answer, I don't recall. And you were correct. You pointed out that you actually asked them to prompt them. Do you know what they were?
Yeah, I think what I meant there was I don't recall what they were, not that I don't recall whether I had given them.
Monica Lewinsky gave the president a series of gifts, notably neckties.
Can you explain why on the very day that Monica Lewinsky testified in the grand jury on August 6th of this year, you wore a necktie that she had given you?
No, sir, I don't believe I did. What necktie was it?
The necktie you wore on August 6th, sir?
Well, I don't know that it was a necktie Monica Lewinsky gave me. Can you describe it to me?
Well, I don't want to take time at this point, but we will provide you with photographic evidence of that, Mr. President.
If you give me, I don't believe that's accurate, Mr. Bennett.
So let me ask
But
the question.
if you give it to me, and I look at it and I remember that she gave it to me, I'll be happy to produce it. I do not believe that's right.
Well, if you remember that she gave it to you, why haven't you produced it to the grand
I don't remember that she gave it to me. That's why I asked you what the tie was. I have
you-
no earthly idea. I believe that, that I did not wear a tie she gave me on August the 6th.
Can you tell us why Biani Nelvis wore a tie that Monica Lewinsky had given you on the day he appeared in the grand jury?
I don't know that he did.
Have you given Biani Nelvis any ties, sir?
Oh, yes, a lot of ties.
And so if he wore the tie that you gave him, that Monica Lewinsky had given you, that would not have been by design. Is that what you're telling us?
Oh, absolutely not.
Not
Let me,
it.
may I explain, Mr. Bennett? It won't take long. Every year, since I've been president, I've gotten quite a large number of ties, as you might imagine. I have a couple of friends, one in Chicago and one in Florida, who give me a lot of ties. A lot of other people who send me ties all the time or give them to me when I see them. So I always have the growing number of ties in my closet. What I normally do is someone gives me a tie as a gift, is I wear it a time or two, I may use it, but at the end of every year, and sometimes 2 times a year, sometimes more, I go through my tie closet and I think of all the things that I won't wear a lot or that I might give away, and I give them mostly to the men who work there. I give them to people like Glenn and Nelvis, who work in the kitchen back in the White House, or the gentlemen who are my stewards, or the butlers, or the people who run the elevators. And I give a lot of ties away a year. I bet excluding Christmas, I bet I give 30, 40, maybe more ties away a year. And then, of course, at Christmas a lot. So there would be nothing unusual if, in fact, Nelvis had a tie that originally had come into my tie closet from Monica Lewinsky. It wouldn't be unusual. It wouldn't be by design. And there are several other people of whom that is also true.
Bill Clinton denies ever trying to persuade either Monica Lewinsky or his secretary, Betty Curry, to remove the gifts from Ms. Lewinsky so that they could not be found or included in the prosecution evidence.
Do you ever have a conversation with Betty Curry about gifts or picking something up from Monica Lewinsky?
I don't believe I did, sir, no.
You never told her anything to this effect, that Monica has something to give you? That
No.
is, say, Betty Curry.
No, sir, I didn't. I don't have any memory of that whatever.
You said that you spoke to her in an attempt to refresh your own recollection about the events involving Ms. Lewinsky. Is that right?
Yes.
How did you making the statement, "I was never alone with her," right, refresh your recollection?
Well, first of all, let's remember the context here. I did not at that time know of your involvement in this case. I just knew that obviously someone had given them a lot of information, some of which struck me as accurate, some of which struck me as dead wrong. But it led them to ask me a whole series of questions about Monica Lewinsky. Then on Sunday morning, this Drudge report came out, which used Betty's name, and I thought that we were going to be dead used by press comments. And I was trying to refresh my memory about what the facts were. So when I said we were never alone, right, I think I also asked her a number of other questions because there were several times, as I'm sure she would acknowledge, when I either asked her to be around. I remember once in particular when I was talking with Ms. Lewinsky, when I asked Betty to be actually in the next room, in the dining room, and as I testified earlier, once in her own office. But I meant that she was always in the Oval Office complex, in that complex while Monica was there. And I believe that this was part of a series of questions I asked her to try to quickly refresh my memory. If I could say one thing about my memory. I have been blessed and advantaged in my life with a good memory. I have been shocked, and so have members of my family and friends of mine, at how many things that I have forgotten in the last 6 years. But I think because of the pressure and the pace and the volume of events in the president's life, compounded by the pressure of your 4-year inquiry, and all the other things that have happened I'm amazed. There are lots of times when I literally can't remember last week. If you ask me, did you talk to Vernon, when's the last time you talked to Vernon Jordan? What time of day was it? When did you see him? What did you say? My answer was the last, you know, if you answer me, when does the last time you saw a friend of yours in California? If you ask me a lot of questions like that, my memory is not what it was when I came here because my life is so crowded.
The prosecutors mean business, and they are determined to take a scalpel to the evidence, cut open the tissue, and tease out the nerves of truth.
At the time of the deposition, that was well beyond any point of improper contact between me and Ms. Lewinsky. So that anyone generally speaking in the present tense, saying there is not an improper relationship, would be telling the truth if that person said there was not in the present tense. Present tense encompassing many months. That's what I meant by that. Not that I wasn't trying to give you a cute answer, that I was obviously not involved in anything improper during the deposition.
Is this the way the world truly sees Bill Clinton, or is it this way, playing lawyer's tricks with language and suffering convenient memory loss?
The statement that there was no sex of any kind, in any manner, shape, or form with President Clinton was an utterly false statement. Is that correct?
Yeah. It depends upon what the meaning of the word is. Yeah. If is means is and never has been, that is not that's one thing. If it means there is none, that was a completely true statement. But as I have testified, I'd like to testify again. It is somewhat unusual for a client to be asked about his lawyer's statements instead of the other way around.
Few Americans can have relished the agonizing level of definition that was sought on the vital issue of what constitutes a sexual relationship. This definition of a sexual relationship was arrived at for the Paula Jones case. It has become a minefield for the president.
If you want me to do it. My understanding of this definition is that it covers contact by the person being deposed with the enumerated areas if the contact is done with an intent to arouse or gratify. That's my understanding of the definition.
What did you believe the definition to include and exclude? What kinds of activities?
I thought the definition included any activity by the person being deposed where the person was the actor and came in contact with those parts of the body with the purpose of intent or gratification, and excluded any other activity. For example, kissing is not covered by that, I don't think.
Did you understand the definition to be limited to sexual activity?
Yes, I understood the definition to be limited to physical contact with those areas of the body with the specific intent to arouse or gratify. That's what I understood it to be.
What specific acts did the definition include as you understood the definition on January 17, 1998?
Any contact with the areas there mentioned, sir. If you contacted those parts of the body with an intent to arouse or gratify, that is covered.
What did you understand?
The person being deposed. If the person being deposed contacted those parts of another person's body with an intent to arouse or gratify, that was covered.
What did you understand the word causes in the first phrase? It is, for the purposes of this deposition, the person engages in sexual relation when the person knowingly causes contact.
I don't know what that means. It doesn't make any sense to me in this context. Because I think what I thought there was, since this was some sort of, as I remember they said in the previous discussion, I'm only remembering now, so if I make a mistake, you can correct me. As I remember from the previous discussion, they said this was some kind of definition that had something to do with sexual harassment. So that implies it's forcing to me, and there was never any issue of forcing in the case involving well, any of these questions they were asking me. They made it clear in this discussion I just reviewed that what they were referring to was intentional sexual conduct, not some sort of forcible abusive behavior. So I basically, I don't think I paid any attention to it because it appeared to me that that was something that had no reference to the facts that they admitted they were asking me about.
Most distasteful of details were examined within the definition of what constitutes a sexual relationship.
The person being deposed touched the genitalia of another person. Would that be in with the intent to arouse the sexual desire, arouse or gratify, as defined in definition 1? Would that be, under your understanding, then and now, sexual relations?
Yes, sir.
Yes, it would?
Yes, it would. If you had a direct contact with any of these places in the body, if you had direct contact with intent to arouse or gratify, that would fall within the definition.
So you didn't do any of those three things with Monica Lewinsky?
You are free to infer that my testimony is that I did not have sexual relations as I understood this term to be defined.
Including touching her breast, kissing her breast, or touching her genitalia?
That's correct.
Would you agree with me that the insertion of an object into the genitalia of another person with the desire to gratify sexually would fit within the definition used in the Jones case as sexual relations?
Understandably, President Clinton appeared uncomfortable with the extreme detail of this questioning.
I think most people, when they use that term, include sexual relationships and whatever other sexual contact is involved in a particular relationship, but they think it includes intercourse as well. And I would thought so before I got into this case and heard all I've heard and seen all I've seen. I would have thought that that's what nearly everybody thought it meant.
So your definition of sexual relationship is intercourse only, is that correct?
No, not necessarily intercourse only, but it would include intercourse. I believe that the common understanding of the term, if you say two people are having a sexual relationship, most people believe that includes intercourse.
The prosecutors consistently targeted and questioned the president on his testimony.
One of the grand jurors has said that you referred to what you did with Ms. Lewinsky as inappropriate contact. What do you mean by that?
I mean just what I said. But I'd like to ask the grand jury, because I think I have been quite specific, and I think I've been willing to answer some specific questions that I haven't been asked yet. But I do not want to discuss something that is intensely painful to me. This has been tough enough already on me and on my family. Although I take responsibility for it, I have no one to blame but myself. What I meant was, and what they can infer that I meant was, that I did things that were, when I was alone with her, that were inappropriate and wrong, but that they did not include any activity that was within the definition of sexual relations that I was given by Judge Wright in the deposition. I said that I did not do those things that were within that definition, and I testified truthfully to that. And that's all I say about it. Now, you know, if there's any doubt on the part of the grand jurors about whether I believe some kind of activity falls within that definition or outside that definition, I'd be happy to try to answer that.
Well, I have a question regarding your definition then, and my question is oral sex performed on you within that definition as you understood it?
As I understood it, it was not, no.
The grand jurors would like to know upon what basis, what legal basis you're declining to answer more specific questions about this. I've mentioned to you that obviously you have privileges against self-incrimination. There's no general right not to answer questions. And so one of the questions from the grand jurors is what basis, what legal basis are you declining to answer these questions?
I'm not trying to evade my legal obligations or my willingness to help the grand jury achieve their legal obligations. As I understand it, you want to examine whether you believe I told the truth in my deposition, whether I asked Ms. Lewinsky not to tell the truth, and whether I did anything else with evidence or in any other way amounted to an obstruction of justice or a subornation of perjury. And I'm prepared to answer all questions that the grand jury needs to draw that conclusion. Now, respectfully, I believe the grand jurors can ask me if I believe, just like that grand juror did. You could ask me, do you believe that this conduct falls within that definition? If it does, then you're free to conclude that my testimony is that I didn't do that. And I believe that you can achieve that without requiring me to say and do things that I don't think are necessary and that I think, frankly, go too far in trying to criminalize my private life.
If a person touched another person, if you touched another person on the breast, would that be, in your view, and was it within your view when you took the deposition, within the definition of sexual relations?
If the person being deposed, in this case me, directly touched the breast of another person with the purpose to arouse or gratify, under that definition, that would be included.
Only directly, sir, or would it be directly or through clothing?
Well, I think the common sense definition would be directly. That's how I would infer what it means.
If the person being deposed kissed the breast of another person, would that be in the definition of sexual relations as you understood it when you were under oath in the Jones case?
Yes, that would constitute contact. I think that would. If it were direct contact, I believe it would.
One of the puzzling aspects of the case is the dress belonging to Miss Lewinsky that was found to have the president's DNA on it a very long time after the affair had ended.
If there is a semen stain belonging to you on a dress of Miss Lewinsky's, how would you explain that?
Well, Mr. Bittman, I don't, first of all, when you asked me for a blood test, I gave you one promptly. You came over here and got it. We met that night and talked. So that's a question you already know the answer to, not if, but you know whether. And the main thing I can tell you is that doesn't affect the opening statement I made. The opening statement I made is that I had inappropriate, intimate contact. I take full responsibility for it. It wasn't her fault, it was mine. I do not believe that I violated the definition of sexual relations I was given by directly touching those parts of her body with the intent to arouse or gratify.
Oral sex, in your view, is not covered, correct?
If performed on the deponent.
Not covered, correct?
That's my reading of this, number one.
And Monica Lewinsky says that while you were in the Oval Office area, you touched her breast, would she be lying?
That is not my recollection. My recollection is that I did not have sexual relations with Miss Lewinsky, and I'm staying on my former statement about that.
If she said...
my statement is that I did not have sexual relations as defined by that.
If she says that you kissed her breast, would she be lying?
I'm going to revert to my former statement.
Okay. If Monica Lewinsky says that while you were in the Oval Office area, you touched her genitalia, would she be lying? That calls for a yes, no, or reverting to your former statement.
I will revert to my statement on that.
On the point about the sexual use of the cigar, President Clinton is extremely uncomfortable, and he refuses to be drawn on the subject.
If Monica Lewinsky says that you used a cigar as a sexual aid with her in the Oval Office area, would you be lying? Yes, no, or won't answer?
I will revert to my former statement.
Monica Lewinsky, with the help of the commission, has logged her sexual history with the president, including telephone sex.
Phone sex occurs when a party to a phone conversation masturbates while the other party is talking in a sexually explicit manner. And the question is, if Monica Lewinsky says that you had phone sex with her, would she be lying?
I think that is covered by my statement.
Bill Clinton has an obvious distaste for the Jones civil suit and accused the Jones team of illegally leaking evidence time and time again.
Do you believe that the Jones litigants had the same understanding of sexual relations that you claim you had?
I don't know what their understanding was, sir. My belief is that they thought they'd get this whole thing in, and that they were going to, what they were trying to do is do just what they did with Gennifer Flowers. They wanted to find anything they could get from me or anyone else that was negative, and then they wanted to leak it to hurt me in the press, which they did, even though the judge ordered them not to. So I think their position, Mr. Bennett, you asked the question, their position was, we're going to cast the widest net we can and get as much embarrassing stuff as we can and then dump it out there and see if we can make him bleed. I think that's what they were trying to do. I knew the case was wrong. I knew what our evidence was. By the time of this deposition, they knew what their evidence was. Their whole strategy was, well, our lawsuit's not good, but maybe we can hurt him with the discovery. And, you know, they did some. But it didn't amount to much. And did I want, if I could, to avoid talking about Monica Lewinsky? Yes, I'd give anything in the world not to be here talking about it. I'd give anything in the world not to have to admit what I've had to admit today.
He believes that the Starr Commission has waged a vendetta on his presidency. The effect of the commission certainly has been to remove much of the ability to act that the president needs. After the bombing of the Sudan and Afghanistan, President Clinton's enemies were convinced it had been staged to divert attention from his domestic troubles. The prosecutors consistently targeted and questioned the president on his testimony in the Paula Jones case.
The Jones lawyer's strategy in this case had nothing to do with uncovering or proving sexual harassment. By the time this discovery started, they knew they had a bad case on the law, and they knew what our evidence was. They knew they had a lousy case on the facts. And so their strategy, since they were being funded by my political opponents, was to have this dragnet of discovery. They wanted to cover everybody, and they convinced the judge, because she gave them strict orders not to leak, that they should be treated like other plaintiffs in other civil cases, and how could they ever know whether there had been any sexual harassment unless they first knew whether there had been any sex. And so with that broad mandate, limited by time and employment in the federal or state government, they proceeded to cross the country and try to turn up whatever they could. Not because they thought it would help their case. By the time they did this discovery, they knew what the deal was in their case, and they knew what was going to happen. And Judge Wright subsequently threw it out. Now, let me finish, Mr. Bennett. You brought this up. Excuse me, Mr. Bittman. What they wanted to do, and what they did do, and what they had done by the time I showed up here, was to find any negative information they could on me, whether it was true or not, get it in a deposition, and then leak it, even though it was illegal to do so. It happened repeatedly. The judge gave them orders. One of the reasons she was sitting in that deposition was because she was trying to make sure that it didn't get out of hand. But that was their strategy, and they did a good job of it, and they got away with it. I've been subject to quite a lot of illegal leaking, and they had a very determined, deliberate strategy because their real goal was to hurt me. When they knew they couldn't win the lawsuit, they thought, well, maybe we can pummel them. Maybe they thought I'd settle. Maybe they just thought they would get some political advantage out of it. But that's what was going on here. Now, I'm trying to be honest with you, and it hurts me. And I'm trying to tell you the truth about what happened between Miss Lewinsky and me. But that does not change the fact that the real reason they were zeroing in on anybody was to try to get any person in there, no matter how uninvolved with Paula Jones, no matter how uninvolved with sexual harassment, so they could hurt me politically. That's what was going on, because by this time, this thing had been going on a long time. They knew what our evidence was. They knew what the law was in the circuit in which we were bringing this case. And so they just thought they would take a wrecking ball to me and see if they could do some damage.
He clearly states that it was not his intention to lie on his Jones deposition, but neither did he wish to help the pro-Jones argument, which was thrown out of court on a matter not relating to the President's testimony.
Or a setup, Mr. President, that would give you the right to commit perjury.
No, sir. No, sir. In the face of the Jones lawyers, the people that were questioning me, in the face of their illegal leaks, their constant, unrelenting illegal leaks, in a lawsuit that I knew, and that by the time this deposition and this discovery started, they knew was a bogus suit on the law and a bogus suit on the facts.
The question...
In the face of that, I knew that in the face of their illegal activity, I still had to behave lawfully. But I wanted to be legal without being particularly helpful. I thought that was what I was trying to do. And you're the first person who ever suggested to me that I should have been doing their lawyers' work for them, when they were perfectly free to ask follow-up questions. On one or two occasions, Mr. Bennett invited them to ask follow-up questions. It now appears to me they didn't because they were afraid I would give them a truthful answer, and that there had been some communication between you and Ms. Tripp and them, and they were trying to set me up and trick me. And now you seem to be complaining that they didn't do a good enough job. I did my best, sir, at this time. I did not know what I now know about this. A lot of other things were going on in my life. Did I want this to come out? No. Was I embarrassed about it? Yes. Did I ask her to lie about it? No. Did I believe there could be a truthful affidavit? Absolutely. Now, that's all I know to say about this. I will continue to answer your questions as best I can.
Bill Clinton admitted that he had had a sexual relationship with Gennifer Flowers, but vehemently denied it had lasted for 12 years.
And I thought about it. I thought about what contact meant. I thought about what intent to arouse or gratify meant. And I had to admit, under this definition, that I'd actually had sexual relations with Gennifer Flowers. Now, I would rather have taken a whipping than done that, after all the trouble I'd been through with Gennifer Flowers. And the money I knew that she had made for the story she told about this alleged 12-year affair, which we had done a great deal to disprove. So I didn't like any of this, but I had done my best to deal with it. And that's what I thought. And I think that's what most people would think reading that.
Bill Clinton clearly believes that he is the victim of an elaborate plot, and that right-wing forces have pursued him to the point where his failings as a man, a husband, and a president are now evident to all. Many would say that there is some substance to this allegation.
I am not sure, Mr. Weisenberg, as I sit here today, that I sat there and followed all these interchanges between the lawyers. I'm quite sure that I didn't follow all the interchanges between the lawyers all that carefully. And I don't really believe, therefore, that I can say Mr. Bennett's testimony or statement is testimony and is imputable to me. I don't know that I was even paying that much attention to it.
Clinton's testimony is a carefully thought out defense against the specific charges laid against him, but it is also calculated to protect, as far as possible, the high office of the president.
My goal in this deposition was to be truthful, but not particularly helpful. I did not wish to do the work of the Jones lawyers. I deplored what they were doing. I deplored the innocent people they were tormenting and traumatizing. I deplored their illegal leaking. I deplored the fact that they knew, once they knew our evidence, that this was a bogus lawsuit, and that because of the funding they had from my political enemies, they were putting ahead. I deplored it, but I was determined to walk through the minefield of this deposition without violating the law, and I believe I did.
The Founding Fathers placed a check on the power of the President with its high crimes and misdemeanors clause, and it is for Congress to decide if he is to be brought to book for the 11 charges placed against him by Prosecutor Starr.
Our agreement was for 4 hours. We've not counted the break time
And
against that.
you know, Mr. Bennett, I wish I could do it. I wish the grand jurors had been allowed to come here today as we invited them to do. I wanted them down here. I wanted them to be able to see me directly. I wanted them to be able to ask these questions directly, but we made an agreement that was different, and I think I will go ahead and stick with the terms of it.